Chapter 1. Barely Wolf Dust and Sweat. That was the taste of Lyra's world. It clung to the back of her throat, a gritty film that never quite washed away. She moved along the edge of the training grounds, a shadow in the morning light, her hands busy collecting discarded leather wraps and blunted practice daggers. Around her, the Crimson Ridge pack moved like a storm of muscle and snarls. Bodies slammed into the packed earth. Grunts tore through the air. This was the music of her people, a symphony she could never join. She wanted only to be invisible, to gather the remnants of their power and fade away before anyone noticed her. It was a foolish wish, because they always noticed. He stood like a mountain in the center of it all. Alpha Kade. His hair was the color of night, his shoulders a challenge to the sky itself. When he moved, the world seemed to hold its breath. Lyra kept her head down, her focus locked on a frayed leather strap near his boots. Just grab it and go. Simple, easy, survive. "Look what we have here," his voice boomed, a low rumble that vibrated right through the soles of her worn shoes and up her spine. The training circle fell silent. Every eye, sharp and predatory, turned to her. A cold dread, familiar and sharp, washed over Lyra. Please, not today. The pack's little ghost, still haunting the edges of our world, Lyra? She flinched at her name. From his lips, it sounded like an insult. She finally looked up, her gaze meeting his. His eyes were the color of molten silver, hard and unforgiving. He held all the power, all the strength, all the things she had been denied. "Alpha," she murmured, her voice a wisp of sound. He took a step closer, his scent, pine and cold fury, overwhelming her. "I asked you a question, Omega." He crouched, bringing his face level with hers. A cruel smile played on his lips. "Tell me, what use is a wolf who cannot fight? A wolf who cannot run with the pack? You are barely wolf at all." The words were stones, each one hitting her with a familiar thud. She had heard them 1,000 times, from him, from others. They built a cage around her heart, a prison of shame she lived in every single day. Her wolf, a weak and slumbering thing, whimpered inside her. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. A tiny, hot ember of fury. She wanted to scream. She wanted to claw at that perfect, arrogant face. Instead, she just stared back at him, her silence her only shield. She knew this was a performance, because Kade always needed an audience to feel tall. His power was built on the backs of the weak, and she was the weakest of all. For just a moment, as her empty eyes met his, something flickered in their silver depths. A flash of something else. Not just mockery. It was confusion. His nostrils flared, and a low, almost imperceptible growl rumbled in his chest. Not his usual sound of dominance, but something deeper. Wilder. It was a sound that seemed to speak directly to the sleeping creature in her soul. A spark jumped between them, electric and strange. It was gone as quickly as it came, leaving her breathless and him visibly unsettled. He straightened abruptly, turning his back on her as if she had burned him. "Get back to your duties," he snapped, his voice tight. "The grounds won't clean themselves." He stalked away, barking orders at his warriors, but the rigid set of his shoulders told a different story. He was bothered. He was confused. And Lyra? Lyra was left kneeling in the dirt, her heart hammering against her ribs for a reason she couldn't possibly understand. That single, inexplicable moment had planted a dangerous seed of a question in her mind. What did he see? The strange feeling was a new kind of puzzle, a mystery that added another layer to her already complicated existence because for the first time, his cruelty felt like a mask for something else entirely. As she gathered the last of the training gear, her fingers brushed against the faint, silvery scar on her shoulder, a mark she kept hidden beneath her tunic, a permanent reminder of why her wolf slept so deeply in the first place. Chapter 2. Herbs and Hope. Leaving the harsh sun of the training grounds behind, Lyra found refuge in the healer's hut. The air inside was different. It smelled of life, of earth, of things that mended instead of broke. Dried lavender hung from the rafters in dusty purple bunches, and shelves were crammed with jars of herbs, salves, and roots. This small, quiet space was the only place Lyra felt like she was more than a ghost. Here, she wasn't the weak Omega. She was just Lyra. Alara, the pack's ancient healer, allowed her this small sanctuary because she saw the gentleness in Lyra's hands, a touch that soothed where others bruised. Today, Lyra's task was to grind moon petal into a fine powder, a simple job that let her mind wander far, far away from the Crimson Ridge pack. As she worked the pestle against the stone mortar, her thoughts drifted to a place she'd only seen in her dreams, a coastline with water so blue it hurt to look at, a place with no alphas, no ranks, no one to call her barely wolf. She dreamed of leaving. It was a desperate, secret hope she nurtured in the silence of the hut. Love, she had decided long ago, was a weapon in this pack. Mates used it to control each other, parents used it to demand obedience. Freedom. Freedom was the only thing worth wanting. The steady rhythm of her grinding was a prayer for that freedom. One day, she would just walk away and never look back. What could they possibly do stop her? She was nothing to them, a loose thread they'd be happy to snip. This quiet rebellion was her only strength. While Kade and his warriors honed their bodies into weapons, Lyra secretly learned the names of herbs. She knew which leaves could stop a fever, which roots could fight infection, and which flowers could ease a troubled mind. Alara once told her, in her creaky, knowing voice, that true power wasn't always in the claws or the fangs. Sometimes, the old wolf had whispered, her eyes cloudy with age, the greatest strength is found in the things that heal. Lyra held onto those words like a charm. They were a promise that she wasn't completely worthless, even if the rest of the pack, especially their alpha, believed she was. Suddenly, a strange sensation prickled across her skin. It started as a faint tingle in her fingertips, then spread up her arms like a wave of warmth. It wasn't unpleasant. It was alive. A pulse of heat bloomed deep in her chest, a slow, powerful thrum that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. She dropped the pestle with a clatter, her breath catching in her throat. Her wolf, the quiet, dormant thing she hadn't felt stir in years, was moving. It was like feeling a phantom limb, a part of herself she had long thought dead. It wasn't a strong feeling, just a flicker, a gentle nudge from the depths of her soul. What did it mean? Why now, after all this time? The warmth faded as quickly as it had come, leaving her feeling strangely empty and more confused than before. She pressed a hand to her chest, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her palm. She knew she should tell Alara, but she couldn't. This was hers. This strange, new feeling was a secret she wasn't ready to share. It felt like the first step on a path she couldn't see, a journey that started right here in this hut full of herbs and hope. The dream of escape suddenly felt a little more real, a little more possible because for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel completely and utterly alone inside her own skin. That flicker of her wolf's presence was a promise, a dangerous and thrilling whisper that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as broken as they all thought she was. Chapter 3. The Unsettled Alpha. The full moon hung in the sky like a giant silver eye, pouring its light down on the pack. The air crackled with energy, a wild, restless hum that made every wolf's blood sing. Lyra hated it. During the full moon, every instinct was sharper. Every emotion was louder, and it was impossible to hide. She stayed near the edge of the clearing, by the shadows of the great pines, hoping the bonfire's light wouldn't find her. She watched as the pack celebrated, their laughter and growls mixing with the crackle of the flames. They were so alive, so connected to the moon and to each other. She was an outsider looking in, a spectator at a party she was never invited to. From across the clearing, she felt his eyes on her again. Kade. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't celebrating. He stood near the fire, a mug in his hand, but his gaze was locked on her. There was that same unsettling intensity she'd seen on the training grounds. A strange pull seemed to connect them, a taut, invisible string that she could feel tugging at her core. He looked angry, confused, haunted. He was the most powerful wolf in their territory, an alpha whose control was absolute. So why did he look like he was losing a battle with himself? The thought sent a shiver of fear, and something else, something dangerously close to curiosity, down her spine. Then he moved. He strode through the crowd, his path a straight, unwavering line directly to her. The pack quieted as he passed, sensing the shift in his mood. The air grew thick with tension. He stopped in front of her, his shadow swallowing her whole. "What did you do to me?" he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. Lyra's heart leaped into her throat. I don't know what you mean, Alpha." "Don't lie to me," he growled, grabbing her arm. His touch was like a brand, searing hot against her cool skin. He dragged her out of the shadows and into the center of the clearing, throwing her before the entire pack. Gasps and whispers erupted around them. "This morning, in the training grounds, my wolf, it answers to you. Why?" He stared down at her, his silver eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and fear. He looked genuinely lost, and that was more terrifying than his usual cruelty. He was accusing her of something impossible, something she couldn't comprehend. Humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. She was on her knees in the dirt again, the pack's judgment pressing down on her. She wanted to shrink, to disappear, to simply cease to exist. But then, as he stood over her, his chest heaving, a voice whispered inside her head. It was quiet, but it was clearer than anything she had ever heard. It wasn't her own thought. It was her wolf, awake and aware, speaking a single possessive word. Mine. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Her wolf, the weak and broken part of her, was claiming the very man who had spent years trying to crush her spirit. It made no sense. It was a nightmare. She looked up at Kade, her eyes wide with terror, and saw his own shock mirrored back at her. He must have felt it too, that sudden, undeniable click of two souls locking into place. This wasn't witchcraft. It was something far older, far more powerful. It was fate. His face paled. The arrogance and control he always wore like armor shattered, revealing the raw, panicked man beneath. He took a stumbling step back, away from her, as if she were the source of a fire he couldn't put out. Without another word, he turned and stormed away, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. His eyes had flashed a brilliant, impossible gold as he left, the color of a wolf losing control. The pack was left in stunned silence, staring at the Omega who had somehow impossibly unsettled their unshakable Alpha. Lyra remained on the ground, trembling, caught between crippling fear and the shocking, terrifying truth her own wolf had just revealed. Their worlds had just cracked wide open. Chapter 4: An Unwanted Bond. The forest was supposed to be a sanctuary. After the chaos at the bonfire, Lyra had fled into the trees, needing the silence of the pines to quiet the impossible word echoing in her soul. Mine. It felt like a madness, a cruel joke played by the moon. She ran until her lungs burned, stopping only when she reached the creek that marked the northern edge of their territory. The cold water rushed over the rocks, a soothing sound in the dead of night. She sank to the ground, wrapping her arms around her knees. She just wanted a moment. One single moment where she wasn't the pack's punching bag or fate's new plaything. That was when the scream tore through the night. It wasn't a wolf's cry. It was raw terror. Then came the snarls, vicious, ragged sounds that didn't belong to her pack. Rogues. Lyra froze, her blood turning to ice. They were close. Too close. Before she could force her trembling legs to move, the fight crashed through the trees. 3 hulking wolves, their fur matted with filth and their eyes glowing with a rabid light, burst into the clearing. They cornered a single Crimson Ridge warrior, Kade. He fought with the fury of an alpha, a whirlwind of black fur and flashing teeth, but he was outnumbered. It was a planned ambush. They were here for him. One rogue lunged, sinking its teeth into his shoulder. Kade roared, throwing the beast off, but another was already at his flank. He was going to die. The thought struck Lyra with the force of a physical blow. The alpha who had made her life a living hell was about to be torn apart in front of her. A part of her, the wounded part, whispered that he deserved it. But her wolf howled in protest. The flicker of warmth she'd felt in the healer's hut erupted into a roaring inferno. It was a power she didn't recognize, a violent, possessive instinct that drowned out all thought. Her body moved without her permission. She didn't shift. She wasn't strong enough, but something else happened. Energy, raw and golden, poured from her, a shimmering thread that shot across the clearing and slammed into Kade. He staggered, his head snapping up to look at her. His silver eyes widened in disbelief. For a second, their energy merged. She felt his strength, his rage, his pain. He felt her. Whatever she was. Infused with this strange power, he moved with impossible speed. He ripped one rogue's throat out before it could blink. He broke the spine of the second with a sickening crunch. The last one, seeing the tide turn, fled into the darkness. Silence fell, broken only by the panting of the alpha and the frantic beat of Lyra's heart. Kade slowly shifted back, his human form slick with sweat and blood. He stood tall, his chest rising and falling, and stared at her. But the look in his eyes wasn't gratitude. It was horror, and in the moonlight everyone could see it. A faint, glowing thread of gold now connected them, pulsing softly in the air between their hearts. The undeniable mark of a fated mate bond, ignited in the heat of battle. The other warriors who had just arrived stood frozen, their mouths agape. They had all seen it. They all knew. Kade took a step toward her, his face a mask of cold fury. He looked at her not as a savior, but as a curse. He looked at the Omega who had somehow tied his soul to hers. He opened his mouth, and the words he spoke were quieter than any blow, but they shattered her world completely. "I, Alpha Kade of the Crimson Ridge Pack," he said, his voice ringing with absolute finality, "reject you, Lyra, as my mate and my Luna." The golden thread between them snapped. The pain was blinding. It was a physical tearing, a ripping sensation deep inside her soul that made the rogue's claws seem like a scratch. She cried out, clutching her chest as darkness swarmed at the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw before she collapsed was the terror in his eyes. Chapter 5, A Shared Weakness. The world came back in pieces. First, the scent of dried herbs. Then, the rough texture of a wool blanket. Finally, the low, murmuring voices that swam around her like ghosts. Lyra's eyes fluttered open. She was back in the healer's hut, the soft glow of a candle chasing the shadows from the corners. The pain in her chest was no longer a sharp, tearing agony. It had settled into a deep, hollow ache, a cold, empty space where that golden thread had been. The rejection had taken something from her, a part of her she hadn't even known she possessed until it was ripped away. Her goal was simple now: survive this. Then, find a way to sever this cursed bond for good. She would rather be broken and free than whole and chained to him. "She is awake," Alara's voice said softly. The old she-wolf's wrinkled face came into view, her expression a mixture of pity and concern. "Drink this, child. It will help with the pain." Lyra managed to sit up, her body feeling impossibly heavy. She took the warm cup, the bitter tea doing little to soothe the coldness inside her. Through the open doorway of the hut, she could hear the pack. Their whispers were like the buzzing of flies, filled with mockery and disbelief. The Alpha rejected the Omega. Did you see her face? She thought she could be Luna. Each word was another small cut. She closed her eyes, wishing she could disappear. This humiliation was a weight too heavy to carry. What she didn't know was that miles away, the Alpha was feeling his own kind of agony. Kade stood on the highest cliff overlooking the territory, the wind whipping his hair. He tried to project an image of strength, of control. But inside, he was coming apart. With every beat of his heart, a wave of weakness washed over him. His wolf, the powerful beast that defined him, was in agony. It paced restlessly inside him, whining for a connection that was no longer there. He had rejected her, but he couldn't reject the bond. It was a part of him now, and by severing it, he had wounded himself. This was a weakness he could not afford to show. Not now. Not ever. Drawn by an instinct he couldn't fight, he found himself stalking back towards the village, his steps leading him to the one place he didn't want to go. He stayed in the shadows outside the healer's hut, hidden from view. He could smell her scent, wildflowers and sorrow, and he could hear her voice, weak but filled with a new, steely resolve. "I have to leave Alara," Lyra whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't stay here. The bond, it will kill me. Or he will." "Leaving won't sever it, little one," the healer replied sadly. "Fate doesn't work that way. It will only make the pain worse, for both of you." "I don't care," Lyra insisted. "I would rather die out there, on my own, than live like this for one more day." Kade leaned against the rough bark of a tree, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow. Leave? She was planning to run. The thought sent a jolt of pure, primal panic through him. It wasn't about love. He didn't love her. He couldn't. It was about survival. His wolf, which had been whimpering in pain, suddenly rose up inside him, its voice a desperate, furious snarl that echoed in his mind, a truth he could no longer deny. "We'll die without her." The fear of losing his strength, his pack, his very life, was suddenly more terrifying than the shame of being bonded to a weak Omega. He was trapped, and so was she. Chapter 6. The Moon's Law. The summons came with the dawn. Two of the Alpha's guards, their faces grim and unreadable, appeared at the entrance of the healer's hut. They didn't speak her name. They didn't have to. "The elders require your presence," one of them stated, his voice flat. "Both of you." The second guard was already at Kade's cabin. There was no escaping this. This was about the Moon's Law, the oldest and most sacred of their traditions. A fated bond was a gift from the moon goddess herself, and to reject it was to insult her. The consequences were not a matter of choice. They were a matter of survival. Lyra walked to the council chambers with Dread as her companion. The chamber was a cave deep beneath the Alpha's lodge, a place of stone and shadows. The air was heavy with the scent of old earth and power. The three elders sat on a raised stone platform, their faces like carved granite, their eyes holding the wisdom of generations. Kade was already there, standing before them. He refused to look at her, but she could feel his tension, a low hum of rage and frustration radiating from him. He looked pale beneath his tan, and he held himself with a rigid control that seemed like it might snap at any moment. "A fated bond has been ignited and rejected," the lead elder, a scarred old wolf named Marcus, said. His voice was a low rumble that seemed to shake the very stones. "This is a grave matter. The bond cannot be undone by choice. It can only be satisfied or it will fester. It will weaken you both until you are nothing but dust." He looked from Kade's defiant face to Lyra's terrified one. "It will weaken this pack. Your wolves will turn on each other and you will bring ruin upon us all." Lyra trembled. She wanted to scream that this wasn't her fault, that she never asked for this. The injustice of it all, to be blamed for a fate she never chose, made her wolf surge with a desperate, self-destructive energy. A searing heat shot through her veins as her wolf tried to claw its way free from the bond, to rip itself away from him. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded behind her eyes. She gasped, staggering as her knees buckled. It felt like she was being torn in two. Across the room, Kade let out a sharp, ragged gasp. He clutched his own chest, his face contorting in pain. He felt it, too. Her agony was his. Her self-destruction was his own. He glared at her, his eyes a mixture of fury and desperation. "Control yourself," he snarled through gritted teeth. "The bond will not be denied," Marcus continued, his voice unwavering. "It demands proximity. It demands a chance. Until the moon has completed its cycle, from this full light to the next, you will not be separated. You will share a roof. You will share your days. The bond must be given time to settle, or it will destroy you both from the inside out. This is the law." Imprisoned. They were being imprisoned together. The thought was horrifying. Lyra looked at Kade, the man who despised her, the Alpha who was now her warden. Terror and a strange, defiant anger warred inside her. This was not a chance at love. It was a death sentence. The guards moved forward, flanking them. They were escorted from the council chambers and through the village, every pack member watching in silence. They stopped before the Alpha's cabin, a large, isolated building made of dark timber. One of the guards pushed the heavy door open, revealing the space that was now to be her cage. Kade walked in without a word, his posture rigid. Lyra hesitated at the doorway, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm of pure panic. The guard behind her gave her a gentle but firm nudge. She stumbled inside. The door swung shut with a heavy, final thud, the sound of a lock clicking into place echoing in the sudden, suffocating silence. In that small, enclosed space, the only sound she could hear was the frantic beat of her own heart, and, impossibly, the faint, steady rhythm of his, beating in perfect, unwilling sync. Chapter 7. The Scent of a Cage. Lyra woke with a gasp, the world swimming into focus slowly. She wasn't in the healer's hut. She was on a soft leather couch, a rough wool blanket thrown over her. The air was thick with a scent that was both overwhelming and achingly familiar, pine, cold mountain air, and the sharp electric tang of an alpha. Kade's scent. It was everywhere. It coated her tongue, filled her lungs, and seemed to sink right into her skin. The cabin was his territory, a space carved from dark wood and stone dominated by a massive, unlit fireplace. Maps were spread across a heavy oak table, and hunting knives gleamed from a rack on the wall. This was the den of the predator who now held her captive. She sat up, her body aching with a strange, deep weariness. She remembered the elders, their grim faces, their unbreakable law. You will share a roof. This was her prison. A frantic, wild energy surged through her. She had to get out. She scrambled off the couch and made a dash for the door, her hand reaching for the iron handle. She got no more than 10 feet before an invisible wall slammed into her. Pain, sharp and blinding, erupted in her chest right where the bond had snapped. She cried out, stumbling back as if she'd been physically struck. It was the bond. It was a chain, a magical leash that tethered her directly to him. "Don't bother," a low voice said from the corner. Kade sat in a large armchair, half hidden in the morning shadows. He was sharpening a wicked-looking blade with a whetstone, the rhythmic shing-shing-shing of steel on stone grating on her nerves. He didn't even look at her. His focus was entirely on the knife, his movements precise and deadly. His deliberate indifference was a special kind of torment, designed to make her feel small and insignificant. He was treating her like a piece of furniture, an unwanted object in his space. The emotional war had begun, and its first battle was being fought in absolute silence. "How long?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Until the next full moon," he answered, his eyes still fixed on the blade. The elders were very clear. A full month, trapped in this cabin with him, tethered by this agonizing magic. The despair was so thick she felt like she was drowning in it. She retreated to the couch, curling into a ball. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something. But what could she do? He was the Alpha, and she was the Omega who had somehow become his anchor. She was a weakness he was now forced to carry, and his resentment was a palpable force in the room. Why did this happen? The question hammered at her because none of it made sense. Fate was supposed to be a gift from the goddess, a blessing. This felt like a curse. Hours crawled by. He never spoke to her again. He reviewed his maps, cleaned his weapons, and moved about the cabin as if she didn't exist. The silence was a weapon, and he wielded it with expert precision. Lyra felt herself starting to unravel. The scent, the silence, the invisible chain. It was all too much. Hot tears of frustration and helplessness began to slide down her cheeks. She buried her face in a cushion, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She cried for her lost dream of freedom, for the humiliation she had endured, and for the terrifying unwanted connection to a man who hated her very existence. Eventually, emotional exhaustion claimed her, dragging her into a restless sleep. She didn't see him finally put the knife down. She didn't see him walk over to the couch, his movements slow and hesitant. He stood over her sleeping form, his expression a complex mask of anger, confusion, and a weariness that mirrored her own. Her face was pale, tear-streaked, and for the first time, she didn't look like a nuisance or a curse. She just looked broken. He reached out a hand as if to touch her cheek, then curled his fingers into a fist, pulling back. A low, tormented sound escaped his lips, a whisper swallowed by the shadows of the room. Why you? Chapter 8. A Spark in the Dark. The next morning, Lyra woke up with a tiny, hard kernel of defiance in her chest. The tears were gone, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. She would not be his ghost. She would not sit on this couch and waste away in silence. If she was a prisoner, she would at least be a defiant one. She rose from the couch, her movements stiff, and walked to the small kitchen area where he was making coffee. The rich, dark scent filled the air, a stark contrast to the bitter tension between them. She stood there, waiting until he was forced to turn and acknowledge her. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "To be released," she said, her own voice surprisingly steady. "I don't care what the elders say. This is wrong. You and I both know it. You rejected me. Let me go." A humorless smirk touched his lips. "You think I have a choice? The bond is real, Omega. Your little stunt in the woods proved that. We're stuck with each other." He turned his back on her, dismissing her again. "It wasn't a stunt," she shot back, her voice rising. "And I am not just an Omega. I have a name." He finally turned to face her fully, leaning back against the counter. He crossed his muscular arms over his chest, his silver eyes glinting with a dangerous light. "Fine, Lyra," he said, drawing out her name like an insult. "What do you want from me, an apology? Do you want me to pretend I'm happy about being shackled to the weakest wolf in this pack? Do you have any idea what this does to me, to my position?" He took a step toward her, his anger rolling off him in waves. "They look at me and see you. They see a weak mate, a flawed alpha." His words were meant to hurt, to put her back in her place. But something inside her had finally had enough. All the years of mockery, all the public humiliations, all the quiet suffering, it all boiled over. "Weak?" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You stand there in your big cabin with all your weapons and all your power, and you call me weak? You don't know the first thing about strength." She took a step toward him, closing the distance between them. "Strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can endure and still get back up. Something you've never had to do." He stared at her, genuinely shocked by her outburst. Then his expression hardened, his cruelty returning like a shield. "Is that what you tell yourself at night? That your weakness is some kind of noble sacrifice?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, taunting whisper. "You hide that pathetic scar on your shoulder like a trophy, but we all know what it means. It means you broke." That was it. The final straw. He had crossed a line, touching on the one wound that had never healed. Without thinking, without hesitation, her hand flew up and she slapped him. The crack of her palm against his cheek echoed in the stunned silence of the cabin. It was a foolish, reckless act, but it felt glorious. His head snapped to the side. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he turned back to face her. The mockery was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by something raw, something primal. His pupils dilated, and the silver of his irises seemed to bleed into gold. Her wolf rose up to meet his, a snarl echoing in her mind. An invisible force slammed between them, a violent collision of their inner beasts. He moved so fast she didn't have time to breathe, backing her up against the wall, his body caging hers. His hands slammed into the wood on either side of her head. "You shouldn't have done that," he growled, his voice a low vibration that she felt in her bones. His face was inches from hers. She could feel his breath on her lips, see the battle raging in his eyes. It was anger. But beneath it, something else burned. Something hot and hungry. Desire. He was going to kiss her. She knew it. She could feel the world tilting, the air growing thick and heavy with unspoken want. He leaned in, his lips parting slightly, and then he shoved himself away from the wall, a strangled curse ripping from his throat. He stormed out of the cabin, slamming the door behind him, leaving Lyra trembling against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Chapter 9. The Alpha's Doubt. After the explosive confrontation in the kitchen, a fragile, unspoken truce settled over the cabin. They moved around each other like two wary wolves, careful not to get too close, careful not to spark another fire. The silence was back, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just him ignoring her. It was a mutual avoidance, a shared space of unresolved tension that was almost worse than the open hostility. Late in the afternoon, desperate for fresh air, Lyra discovered that a heavy wooden door at the back of the cabin led to a small enclosed yard, fenced in by a high stone wall. It was another cage, but at least it was a cage under the open sky. She stepped out into the cool air, breathing deeply. That's when she heard it. A soft, pitiful whimpering coming from a patch of overgrown bushes near the wall. Cautiously, she pushed the leaves aside. Curled up on the ground was a tiny wolf pup, no older than a few months. It was a dusky gray color, its fur matted with dirt. One of its hind legs was bent at an unnatural angle, swollen and bruised. It looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes, too weak to even lift its head. It was a runt, most likely abandoned by its mother and overlooked by the pack warriors. In their world, only the strong survived. A pang of sympathy shot through Lyra. She saw herself in this small, discarded creature. Without a second thought, she knelt beside it. "Hey there," she whispered, her voice soft and gentle. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." She recognized some familiar herbs growing along the base of the wall, yarrow to stop bleeding and comfrey, which the healers called knitbone. She carefully gathered the leaves, crushing them between two stones to make a makeshift poultice. The pup whined as she gently examined its leg, but it didn't snap or snarl. It seemed to sense she was trying to help. With practiced hands, she cleaned the wound and applied the healing paste, then found two straight sticks to create a crude splint, binding it with strips of leather she tore from the hem of her own tunic. She didn't know that she was being watched. From the window of his study, Kade had seen her slip outside. He had followed, his curiosity getting the better of him. He expected to see her moping, perhaps even trying to find a way to escape. He did not expect to see this. He stood in the shadows of the doorway, silent and unseen, and watched the entire scene unfold. He watched as the Omega he had called worthless showed more competence and compassion than many of his best warriors. She wasn't clumsy or afraid. Her hands were steady, her movements sure. She murmured soft, comforting words to the pup, her voice a low, soothing melody. He saw the way she sacrificed a piece of her own clothing without hesitation. He witnessed a quiet, unassuming strength that had nothing to do with fighting or dominance. It was the strength of a healer, the strength of a protector. And it was aimed at the weakest, most helpless member of the pack, a creature he himself would have dismissed without a thought. A strange, uncomfortable feeling churned in his gut. It felt like guilt. Every cruel word he had ever thrown at her, every taunt, every dismissal, it all seemed to ring hollow now. He had built his image of her on one single defining moment from her past, the moment she got her scar. He had never bothered to look deeper. He had never wanted to. Why? Because it was easier to mock her than to understand her. That night, sleep offered Kade no escape. The image of Lyra tending to the pup was burned into his mind. He tossed and turned, caught in a vivid, unsettling dream. In the dream, they were back in the forest, surrounded by rogues. But this time, they weren't after him. They were after her. A primal, possessive rage unlike anything he had ever known ripped through him. He fought with a savagery that was terrifying, a desperate need to keep her safe, consuming him completely. As he stood over the bodies of their enemies, he turned to her, and his wolf, his own powerful, arrogant beast, spoke a single, clear command inside his mind, a whisper that shook him to his very core. Protect her. Chapter 10. A different kind of storm. A few days passed in the quiet cabin, but the silence had changed. It was no longer a weapon of indifference. It was a fragile glass wall, and they were both terrified of making the first crack. Kade watched her now. When he thought she wasn't looking, she would catch his gaze on her, his expression a tangled knot of confusion and something she was too afraid to name. His hostility had faded, replaced by a tense, watchful energy. The dream of him protecting her, his wolf's whisper echoing in her mind, had changed him. She didn't understand it, and that lack of understanding was a new kind of fear. Their fragile peace was shattered when the elders sent word. They were to attend the evening pack meal. Together. In public. It wasn't a request. It was a test. Walking into the great hall at his side felt like walking into a fire. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned to them. The whispers followed them like a trail of smoke as Kade led her to the Alpha's table on the raised platform. Lyra kept her head down, her focus on the wooden grain of the table in front of her. She could feel the pack's resentment, a heavy, suffocating blanket of it. They saw her as a contamination, a disease that had infected their strong, perfect Alpha. The challenge came from his beta, a burly wolf named Marcus, whose loyalty to Kade was second only to his loyalty to pack tradition. He stood to offer a toast, his eyes filled with a righteous fire. To the strength of the pack, he boomed, raising his mug. Then he turned his gaze on Lyra, his lip curling in a sneer. And to a swift recovery for our Alpha, from the curse that binds him. The insult was clear, a deliberate jab meant for the entire pack to hear. Lyra flinched, bracing herself for Kade's agreement, or worse, his silence. She expected him to use this moment to reinforce his own disgust, to put her back in her place. Instead, the air grew deadly cold. Kade rose from his seat, not with a sudden burst of anger, but with a slow, terrifying calm. He placed his hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. "She is under my protection, Marcus," Kade said, his voice dangerously low. Every wolf in the hall froze. "Her name is Lyra, and she is not a curse." He looked directly at his beta, his silver eyes turning hard as steel. "Speak of her that way again, and you will lose your tongue. Is that understood?" A collective gasp went through the hall. Lyra's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. He had defended her, in front of everyone. The shock was so profound. She felt dizzy. Marcus paled, stammering an apology before sitting down heavily. Kade remained standing for a moment longer, his gaze sweeping the room in a silent, deadly warning. Then he turned, grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her from the hall, leaving a stunned and whispering pack in their wake. The moment they were outside, the heavens opened up. A cold, hard rain began to fall, soaking them in seconds. The storm seemed to mirror the tempest raging between them. Kade finally let go of her, running a hand through his wet hair in frustration. He looked furious, but not at her. He was angry with himself. "What are you doing to me?" he growled, turning on her. "Me?" she cried, her own confusion and shock finally bubbling over. "What am I doing? You're the one who just I know what I did, he roared, his control finally snapping. I don't know why. I look at you and my wolf. It wants to tear apart anyone who looks at you with disrespect. It makes no sense. He stalked toward her, backing her up against the rough outer wall of the great hall. The cold rain plastered her thin tunic to her skin, but she didn't feel it. All she could feel was the heat rolling off him. This is your fault. All of it. It is not my fault, she yelled back, shoving at his chest. It was like pushing against a stone wall. I never asked for this bond. I never asked for you. His hands shot out, grabbing her shoulders. Well, you have me. The anger in his eyes suddenly melted away, replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the rain dripping from her eyelashes, the fierce, defiant fire in her eyes, the way she trembled under his touch. And just like that, the fight went out of him. By the goddess. You have me, he whispered, his voice full of a terrible wonder. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. The world seemed to shrink to just the space between their lips, the sound of the rain, and the frantic beating of their two hearts. He was going to kiss her. This time, it was real. But just as his lips were about to touch hers, a flicker of fear crossed his face. Fear of this feeling. Fear of losing himself completely. He pulled back as if burned, a curse on his lips, and left her standing alone in the pouring rain. Chapter 11. The Price of Surrender. The morning after the storm was unnaturally quiet. The rain had washed the world clean, leaving behind the fresh scent of damp earth and pine. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with things left unsaid. The almost kiss hung between them, a ghost of a touch, a promise of a fire they were both afraid to ignite. They didn't speak as they prepared for the day's task, another decree from the elders, a joint patrol of the northern border. The path through the woods was tense, the silence broken only by the crunch of their boots on fallen leaves. Lyra walked a few paces behind Kade, her gaze fixed on the powerful muscles of his back. He hadn't just defended her last night. He had almost surrendered to the bond, and that scared her more than his hatred ever had. The attack came with no warning. One moment, the forest was peaceful. The next, it was an explosion of snarls and violence. Rogues. At least 5 of them, moving with a chilling coordination that the last group had lacked. They didn't ambush. They hunted. Their target was obvious. Kade. They ignored Lyra completely, their eyes fixed on the Alpha with a singular murderous intent. Kade met them with a roar, his body shifting in a blur of motion. He was a magnificent, terrifying force, his black wolf a whirlwind of claws and teeth. But they were prepared for him. They worked together, flanking him, drawing his attention in one direction while another attacked from his blind spot. Lyra stood frozen in terror. Useless. This was a battle of titans, and she was a mouse caught in the middle. She watched as Kade took a deep gash to his leg, his roar of pain echoing through the trees. He was slowing down. They were tiring him out, wearing him down. This was a calculated execution. One of the rogues, a huge beast with a scarred muzzle, saw its opening. While Kade was busy fending off 2 others, the scarred rogue lunged, its yellow fangs aimed directly for Kade's exposed throat. There was no time to think. There was no time for fear. There was only instinct. A primal scream tore from Lyra's throat. It wasn't the whisper of her wolf. It was the roar of a mate. Mine! Her body moved, a blur of motion she didn't know she possessed. She threw herself between Kade and the attacking rogue. She wasn't a warrior. She had no claws to offer, no fangs to bear. All she had was her body, and she offered it as a shield without a second thought. The rogue's claws, meant for the thick hide of an alpha, sliced through her side like knives through cloth. The pain was instantaneous and absolute, a fire that stole her breath and sent a wave of blackness crashing over her. She crumpled to the ground, a strangled cry escaping her lips. And then everything changed. The moment her blood hit the forest floor, the air itself seemed to shift. The scent, her scent, rich and vital, filled Kade's lungs. And his wolf, the proud, arrogant beast that had fought the bond for so long, finally broke. It didn't just accept the bond, it surrendered to it. Utterly, completely. A tidal wave of pure, undiluted emotion slammed into him, washing away every last trace of his denial, his anger, his fear. In that single heart-stopping moment, he knew. He didn't just need her to survive. He didn't just desire her. He loved her. He loved Lyra. The realization was as devastating as the claws in her side. This wasn't about the bond. This was about her courage, her sacrifice, her. A sound ripped from his throat that was not animal, not human, but something in between. A sound of pure, soul-shattering agony. The rogues, startled by the sudden shift in his power, hesitated. It was the last mistake they ever made. He moved, no longer a fighter, but a force of nature. An avenging god. He tore them apart, his grief and rage fueling a strength they could never have anticipated. When it was over, he stood panting over their broken bodies, his black fur stained with their blood and hers. He shifted back, rushing to her side. She was so pale, the life fading from her eyes. The wound was too deep. The healers were too far. She was dying, and as he looked down at her, his heart shattering, he knew there was only one way. It was forbidden. It broke every law he had sworn to uphold, and he didn't care. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered, "You are mine." Then he lowered his head and sank his teeth into her shoulder, marking her, claiming her, binding her life to his forever. Chapter 12. Hunted together. Lyra drifted back to consciousness on a sea of pain. The fire in her side had been banked to a dull, throbbing ache, but a new sensation burned on her shoulder. It was a sharp, possessive heat, a feeling of being branded. Her eyelids fluttered open. She was in Kade's bed, the soft furs a stark contrast to the agony in her body. She slowly lifted a trembling hand and touched her shoulder. Her fingers traced the unmistakable ridges of a bite mark, the Alpha's mark, a symbol of absolute belonging. A strange, terrifying peace settled over her. It felt right. Like the final piece of a puzzle she never knew she was solving had just been slammed into place. Kade was sitting in a chair beside the bed, his head in his hands. He looked broken. When he heard her stir, his head shot up. The arrogance, the anger, the cold indifference. It was all gone. His silver eyes were filled with a raw, desperate fear that was aimed entirely at her. "Lyra," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I had to. You were dying." Before she could answer, the cabin door burst open, slamming against the inside wall. The elders stood there, their faces thunderous. Behind them, a squad of the Alpha's guards, his own men, filled the doorway. And just behind the elders, a smug, triumphant look on his face, was Marcus. He was the one who had brought them here. "You have broken the sacred law," Marcus, the lead elder, boomed, his voice echoing in the small cabin. He pointed a trembling finger at Kade. "You have marked an unconfirmed mate against the will of the elders and the tradition of this pack. You have allowed yourself to be weakened, to be controlled by this creature." He spat the last word, his gaze shifting to Lyra. "She is a witch. She has ensnared our Alpha with her dark magic." "That's not true," Kade roared, jumping to his feet and placing himself between Lyra and the elders. He was an Alpha again, but this time his power was not for his pack. It was for her. "Your actions prove otherwise," the elder continued, his voice cold. "You are no longer fit to lead. The council declares you removed as Alpha of the Crimson Ridge Pack." The words were a death sentence to his entire identity. "And she—" He looked at Lyra, his eyes filled with disgust. "She will be taken to the cells to await her trial. We will burn the witch out of her." He nodded to the guards. They moved forward, their spears leveled. Kade didn't hesitate. He met them with a snarl, no longer their leader, but an obstacle. He moved with a desperate speed, not to kill his own men, but to disarm them, to create an opening. He was fighting for her, for them. It was chaos. Men shouted, spears clattered against the stone floor. Kade was powerful, but he couldn't hold them all off forever. He glanced back at Lyra, his eyes wild and desperate. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was it. They were going to tear them apart. But Kade's expression wasn't one of defeat. It was one of decision. He had made his choice. In the middle of the fight, he knocked the last guard aside, creating a clear path to the bed. He rushed to her, his eyes locking with hers, and in them she saw a future she had never dared to imagine. A future with him. "The pack will not have you," he said, his voice low and urgent, his words meant only for her. "So they will not have me either." He scooped her into his arms, ignoring her gasp of pain. He was strong, his arms a protective cage around her. He turned his back on his men, on his title, on his entire life. "We have to go," he said, his voice a raw promise. "Now." With a powerful kick, he shattered the large window at the back of the cabin. The sound of splintering wood and breaking glass filled the air. Without a moment's hesitation, he jumped through the opening, landing gracefully on the soft earth outside. He didn't stop. He didn't look back. He just ran, carrying her in his arms, fleeing into the deep, dark woods. They were no longer Alpha and Omega. They were rogues, fugitives, two hunted souls against the entire world. Chapter 13. The Mountain's Mercy. They ran for 2 days, a desperate, blurring flight through thick forests and over rocky streams. Kade, fueled by adrenaline and a terror he had never known, carried her the entire way. Lyra drifted in and out of a painful haze, aware only of the steady beat of his heart against her ear and the strength of the arms that refused to let her go. He finally found shelter high in the mountains, a place the pack had long forgotten, a deep, dry cave hidden behind a curtain of icy waterfall. This den, smelling of damp stone and old earth, became their sanctuary. It was raw, elemental, and for the first time in her life, Lyra felt truly safe. Her body healed with the accelerated speed of a marked wolf, but the process was still agonizing. The bond poured his strength into her, mending her torn flesh, but it left him drained and weary. For the first few days, their world shrank to the confines of the cave. He tended to her, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he cleaned her wound and brought her fresh water from the falls. The power dynamic between them was gone. He wasn't the Alpha King, and she wasn't the weak Omega. They were just Kade and Lyra, two souls in exile, stripped bare of everything but each other. On the third night, as she was finally able to sit up on her own, a quiet, vulnerable conversation began. The fire he had built crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. "Why did you hate me so much?" she asked, the question a soft whisper in the dark. She needed to know. She needed to understand the cruelty that had shaped her entire life. Kade didn't look at her. He stared into the flames, his face etched with a deep, aching remorse. "I didn't hate you, Lyra," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I hated what you represented." He finally turned to look at her, his silver eyes filled with a pain she had never seen before. "Before my father died, before I was Alpha, I was small. I was not the strongest pup. My older brother, he was the heir. He was powerful, and he never let me forget how weak I was." He took a shaky breath. "He died in a border skirmish. The title fell to me. I spent every day since then building myself into something hard, something unbreakable, something that no one would ever call weak again." He looked at her, and now she understood. "And then I looked at you," he continued, his voice cracking. "You endured everything, the taunts, the isolation. The pack treated you like dirt, and you never broke. You just kept going. That quiet endurance, it was a mirror. It reminded me of that small, powerless boy I used to be, and it terrified me." He finally confessed the truth that had festered inside him for years. "So I hurt you. I pushed you down to make myself feel tall. It was the act of a coward, not an alpha. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of understanding. All the years of pain suddenly clicked into place, not as an act of pure hatred, but as the desperate defense of a wounded boy. She reached out, her fingers gently touching his cheek. He flinched at first, then leaned into her touch, a shuddering sigh escaping him. The last of the walls between them crumbled into dust. In the flickering firelight, there were no more secrets, no more lies. There was only an aching honesty and a profound, shared vulnerability. He moved from the floor to the furs beside her, his touch now hesitant, questioning. She gave him a small, watery smile, an answer that needed no words. He leaned in and kissed her, and it was nothing like the almost kiss in the rain. There was no anger, no desperation. It was a kiss of profound apology, of gentle reverence, of a soul finding its home. That night, they came together, not in a clash of passion, but in a slow, healing surrender. It wasn't just the joining of their bodies. It was the weaving together of two broken souls finally made whole in the mountain's quiet mercy. Chapter 14. An Unwelcome Truth. The morning after felt like a new creation. Lyra woke wrapped in Kade's arms, the steady rhythm of his breathing a comforting presence beside her. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace so deep it seemed to settle in her very bones. The biting mark on her shoulder was no longer a symbol of a broken law, it was a promise. She looked at Kade, his face softened in sleep, and allowed herself to hope. They could build a life here, away from the pack, away from the judgment and the pain. A life that was truly their own. When he woke, his eyes held the same quiet hope. They were a team now, a pack of two. Their future was an unwritten page, and for the first time, Lyra was excited to see what came next. Their fragile peace was shattered in the afternoon. A scent on the wind, unfamiliar and sharp, put Kade on immediate alert. He stood at the entrance of the cave, his body a low, rumbling warning. A lone wolf approached the waterfall, not with the skulking gait of a rogue, but with the confident stride of an alpha. He was lean, his fur the color of iron gray, and his intelligent yellow eyes held no immediate malice. He stopped a respectful distance away and shifted, revealing a man with a weathered face and a calm demeanor. "Alpha Kade," the man said, his voice even. "My name is Silas. I'm not here to fight." "You're a rogue," Kade growled, positioning himself in front of Lyra, a protective shield. "You attacked us. You nearly killed my mate." Silas's expression was grim. He nodded. "My pack was part of the group that attacked you on the border, but we were not the ones who ambushed you at the creek. We are not murderers. We are outcasts." He explained that he led a faction of wolves who had been exiled by cruel alphas, wolves who were just trying to survive. Then, he delivered the blow that cracked their newfound world apart. "The attacks were not random, Alpha. They were a job. We were hired." "Hired?" Kade repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "By whom?" "By your beta," Silas said, his gaze steady. "Marcus." The name hung in the air, cold and heavy. Lyra's heart sank. Kade stood completely still, the color draining from his face. Silas continued, his words painting a sickening picture of betrayal. Marcus had approached the rogues weeks ago. He saw Kade's growing obsession with the Omega as a weakness, an opportunity. He promised Silas's people a piece of the Crimson Ridge territory, a place to live in peace if they helped him get rid of Kade. The plan was to make it look like a tragic rogue attack, leaving the path clear for Marcus to take over as Alpha. "He used your bond with her as the final excuse," Silas finished. "He convinced the elders you were compromised. He staged a coup." Oh, terrible, guttural roar of pure rage ripped from Kade's throat. It was the sound of a king betrayed, a trust shattered. The quiet, gentle man Lyra had woken up next to was gone, replaced by the furious Alpha he was born to be. The desire for peace, for a new life, was burned away by a white-hot need for vengeance. "Marcus," he snarled, the name a curse. I will tear him apart." "Kade, no," Lyra pleaded, grabbing his arm. "Please, let it go. The pack betrayed us. Let's not go back. We can be free here." She had just found him. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him to a war he might not win. He turned to her, his silver eyes blazing with an inner fire. The conflict in them was terrible to behold. He looked at her, and she could see the love, the desire for the peaceful life she was offering. But then he looked past her, toward the valley where his pack lived, and she saw the Alpha, the warrior, the betrayed king. "He tried to kill you, Lyra," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "He used you to destroy me. This isn't about the pack anymore. This is about him. I cannot let that stand." She knew then that she had lost. The pull of his past, of his duty, of his rage, was too strong. He was going to go back. He was going to choose war. As she looked into the eyes of the man she loved, she saw his path laid out before him, a path of blood and violence. And a cold, desperate plan began to form in her own heart, a secret, selfless idea to stop the war before it could consume him whole. Chapter 15. A Vow in the Dark. That night, sleep was an impossible dream. Kade paced the confines of the small cave like a caged lion, the firelight glinting off the raw fury in his eyes. He was trapped between two worlds. One was a future of peace with her, a quiet life she offered like a gentle hand. The other was a past filled with betrayal, a duty that screamed for vengeance. Lyra lay on the furs, pretending to be asleep, her heart aching with every restless step he took. She watched him through slitted eyelids, seeing the war that raged within him. And she knew, with a certainty that felt like a cold stone in her stomach, which side would win. He would choose the war. He would go back to fight Marcus, and whether he won or lost, the gentle soul she had just discovered would be a casualty. She couldn't let that happen. She would not be the cause of his destruction. As she lay there, a memory surfaced, a fragment of lore Lyra had told her once on a quiet afternoon in the healer's hut. The old she-wolf had spoken of ancient bloodlines and the power of fated bonds. She'd mentioned a ritual, a dangerous and forgotten one, that could be used to calm a soul fire, an oath made under the full moon to sever a curse. Lyra's mind, desperate for a solution, twisted the old legend into a new, terrible shape. She wasn't cursed, but maybe the bond was. If she could sever the bond, if she could cut the tie that made him weak in the pack's eyes, then they would have no reason to hunt him. He would be free. He would be safe. It was a desperate, flawed plan, born of love and grief. She believed it was her only choice. Finally, his restless energy gave way to sheer exhaustion. Kade collapsed onto the furs beside her, falling into a deep, troubled sleep. This was her chance. With a heart that felt like it was breaking into 1,000 tiny pieces, she slowly, silently, slipped from his grasp. She stood over him for a long moment, memorizing the shape of his face in the dying firelight. She leaned down and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to his forehead, a silent apology, a final goodbye. "I love you," she whispered, the words swallowed by the vast silence of the cave. She slipped out from behind the waterfall, the cold night air a shock against her skin. The moon was a sliver of silver in the sky, not yet full, but she prayed it would be enough. Guided by an instinct she didn't understand, she climbed higher up the mountain, her feet finding a path that seemed to call to her. She came to a small, hidden plateau, a perfect circle of flattened stone that felt ancient and sacred. This was the place. Standing in the center of the stone circle, she closed her eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. She thought of Alara's words, a blood oath. She took a sharp shard of rock and, without hesitating, drew it across her palm. Blood, dark in the moonlight, welled up. She raised her hand to the sky, a desperate offering to a goddess she wasn't sure was listening. "Moon goddess," she prayed, her voice a raw, broken plea. "I don't ask for my own life. I ask for his. Sever this bond. Free him from me. Let him be the Alpha he was meant to be. Take my life, my spirit, whatever you want. Just let him live in peace. She squeezed her fist, letting her blood drip onto the ancient stone, sealing her vow. Miles away in the dark cave, Kade woke with a violent jolt. A sudden, piercing cold shot through his entire body, so intense it felt like he had been plunged into a frozen lake. He reached for Lyra, his hand finding only the empty, cooling space on the furs beside him. He sat bolt upright, his heart hammering in his chest. "Lyra?" he called out, his voice filled with a rising panic. She was gone. And then he felt it. The bond. The warm, constant presence that had hummed between their souls since he marked her was fading. It was growing thin, weak, like a dying ember. A horrified, guttural cry was ripped from his throat as he realized the truth. She wasn't just gone. She was dying. And he could feel every agonizing second of it. Chapter 16. The Fading Ember. The cold was absolute. It was not the chill of the mountain air or the dampness of the cave. It was a coldness of the soul, a void opening inside Kade where a warm, vibrant fire had just been burning. He sat bolt upright in the darkness, the furs falling away, his hand clutching the empty space where Lyra should have been. Her scent lingered, a ghostly trace of wildflowers and her own unique magic. But she was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. Lyra? The name was a ragged sound, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the den. And then he felt it. The bond, the living, breathing connection that had become his anchor, was fraying. It felt like a rope being cut, strand by agonizing strand. Her life force, which had pulsed in sync with his own, was now a faint, fluttering tremor, growing weaker with every passing second. His wolf, the proud beast that had once ruled a pack, let out a piteous whine deep inside him, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. The strength she had given him, the peace she had granted him, was draining away, leaving him hollow and weak. He burst from the cave, shifting mid-stride. But the transformation was clumsy, painful. His powerful alpha form felt sluggish, his muscles screaming in protest. The weakness the bond had warned of was no longer a threat. It was a crippling reality. He was losing himself because he was losing her. He cast about wildly, his nose to the ground, trying to find her trail. He found her scent leading away from the den, up toward the higher peaks. He ran, his paws stumbling on the rocky terrain. The powerful, fluid grace of the Alpha was gone, replaced by a desperate, clumsy scramble. This powerlessness was a suffocating shroud, a horrifying echo of the helpless boy he once was, watching his brother best him at every turn. He was weak again, and it was because the one person who made him strong was disappearing. He finally reached the circular stone plateau she had found. Her scent was strong here, and so was the metallic tang of her blood. A dark stain marred the center of the ancient stone. A wave of nausea rolled through him. What had she done? Had she truly tried to sacrifice herself for him? But there was another scent, too. Several others. The familiar, unwelcome smell of his own pack warriors. And beneath it all, the scent of the one wolf he now despised more than any other. Marcus. They had found her. They had taken her. This wasn't a sacrifice. It was a capture. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He stood there, a broken creature on a lonely mountaintop, and understood the depth of his beta's betrayal. Marcus hadn't just stolen his pack. He had stolen his mate. He had stolen his very soul. Kade threw his head back to howl his rage to the uncaring sky, but the sound caught in his throat. At that exact moment, a scream, thin and full of agony, pierced his mind. It wasn't a sound he heard with his ears. It was a psychic echo, a desperate cry transmitted through the last dying threads of their bond. Her scream. The pain in it was so profound, so absolute, it shattered his remaining strength. His legs buckled beneath him, and the great Alpha Kade, the former king of the Crimson Ridge, collapsed onto the cold stone, utterly and completely broken. Chapter 17. A Prayer for Oblivion. The world was cold stone and damp shadows. Lyra slowly came to, the taste of blood and despair in her mouth. She was back in the pack's territory, thrown into the dark, musty cell beneath the council chambers. Heavy chains, their links etched with faint silver runes, bound her wrists to the wall. They felt cold to the touch, and they seemed to sap what little strength she had left. Her selfless vow on the mountain had been a fool's prayer. She had not found a goddess. She had found Marcus. He and his warriors had been tracking them the whole time, waiting for a moment of weakness. And she had walked right into their trap. The heavy wooden door to the cell creaked open, spilling a sickly yellow torchlight into the gloom. Marcus stood there, his face a mask of triumphant righteousness. He was not the Alpha yet, but he wore the arrogance of one like a stolen cloak. "The witch awakens," he sneered. "What do you want?" Lyra whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "I want to save my pack," he said, his voice dripping with false piety. "I want to cleanse our Alpha of your taint. You have poisoned him, made him weak, but we have ways of fixing that." He stepped aside, and another figure entered the cell. It was an old wolf, his face a roadmap of scars, his eyes holding a wild, unsettling light. He was a shaman of the old ways, a practitioner of magic the pack had long since outlawed. He held a ceremonial knife carved from obsidian and a bowl filled with a dark, viscous liquid. Lyra's blood ran cold. She knew what this was. They were going to perform a ritual of severing, a dark, violent magic designed to rip a bond apart at its roots. "No," she breathed, shaking her head. "You'll kill him." "It will hurt him, yes," Marcus admitted with a cruel smile. "But when it is done, he will be free of you. He will be our Alpha again, strong and pure. A little pain is a small price to pay for the survival of the pack." The shaman began to chant, his voice a low, guttural drone that seemed to make the very air vibrate. He painted symbols on the stone floor with the dark liquid, symbols that seemed to writhe in the torchlight. Lyra felt a new kind of agony begin, a pain that was not of the body but of the spirit. It was a cold, invasive force that wormed its way inside her, seeking the warm, golden light of her wolf, of her bond with Kade. It was a violation. The magic latched onto her inner wolf and began to pull. It felt like her soul was being torn apart. The pain was beyond anything she had ever imagined. But worse than the pain was the crushing weight of her own failure. Her sacrifice had not saved Kade. It had led his enemies right to him. She saw herself through Marcus's eyes then, not as a healer, not as a mate, but as a curse. A worthless Omega who had brought ruin upon the strongest wolf she had ever known. This was her deepest, darkest fear made real. She was the cause of his suffering. A desperate, final prayer formed in her mind. She no longer prayed for freedom or for her own life. She prayed for him. Through the agony, she focused on the last, flickering embers of their bond. She tried to push him away, to use her own will to sever the connection, to spare him this shared torment. "Forget me," she pleaded into the bond, her thoughts a frantic, silent scream. "Let me go. Be free, Kade. Please, be free." The shaman's chant grew louder. The tearing sensation intensified. The last of her strength gave way. Darkness crowded her vision, a welcome relief. Her pulse slowed to a faint, thready flutter. Her final thought was not for herself, but for him, a whispered prayer for his oblivion. He deserves freedom. Chapter 18. The Blood Moon's vow weakness was a poison. Kade crawled through the undergrowth of his own territory, his body a vessel of shivering agony. The strength of the Alpha had bled out of him, leaving behind a desperate, aching male. Lyra's scream had become a faint, torturous echo in his mind, a constant reminder of her suffering. Every ounce of his being screamed at him to give up, to lie down and let the darkness take him, to fade away with her. But the image of her face, the memory of her sacrifice, the feeling of her heart beating against his, it was a fire that refused to be extinguished. Love, he realized, was a strength all its own, and it was all he had left. He moved like a ghost through the packlands he once ruled, his knowledge of the territory his only advantage. He avoided the main paths, sticking to the shadows, his senses straining. The pack was on high alert, the air thick with tension, and the scent of Marcus's smug authority. Kade's destination was the one place he knew they would take her, the cells beneath the council chambers. He found a drainage grate at the base of the lodge, one he had ordered sealed years ago. It was his only way in. With the last of his strength, he tore the rusted iron from the stone and slipped into the darkness below. The air in the tunnels was foul, thick with the smell of mildew and despair. He followed the faint scent of her blood, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He found her in the last cell. The sight of her shattered what was left of his soul. She was chained to the wall, her head lolling to the side. Her body was pale and still, her tunic stained with blood. The vibrant life that had burned so brightly in her was now a barely perceptible flicker. He could feel it through the bond, a tiny, fragile spark in an overwhelming sea of darkness. He had been too late. The world tilted, his vision blurring with tears of rage and grief. He had done this, his cruelty, his pride, his blindness. It had all led to this. He had broken her long before Marcus ever laid a hand on her. This was his dark night of the soul. Kneeling on the cold, damp floor of a prison in his own home, staring at the body of the woman he loved more than life itself, he lost everything. His title, his strength, his pack, his future. It was all gone. All that remained was a hollow, aching void. He could let it consume him. He could lie down beside her and let their bond fade into nothingness together. It would be so easy. But as he looked at her pale, still face, something else rose from the ashes of his despair. It was not the arrogant pride of an alpha. It was a fierce, primal possession. She was his. Her life was his life. Her soul was his soul. If she was to be dragged into the darkness, he would follow her in and rip her back out with his bare hands. He would not let her go. He would not let them win. His strength was never in his title. It was in her, and he would burn the whole world down to save her. As if summoned by his revelation, a sliver of bloody light sliced through the tiny barred window of the cell. A blood moon was rising, casting an eerie crimson glow over her still form. The sight filled him with a terrible, divine purpose. All his pain, all his grief, all his boundless rage coalesced into a single, unbreakable vow. He reached through the bars of the cell, his fingers just managing to brush against her cold skin. He threw his head back, and from the depths of his broken soul, he let out a howl. It was not the howl of an alpha claiming his territory. It was the howl of a male claiming his mate from the jaws of death, a sound of pure, untamed fury that shook the very foundations of the lodge. It was a promise of retribution, a declaration of war. She is mine. Chapter 19. The Witch's Key. The howl echoed through the stone corridors, a promise of bloody retribution that sent a tremor of fear through the pack guards. Chaos erupted. Shouts and the sound of running feet grew closer. Kade didn't have time. He threw his weakened body against the iron bars of Lyra's cell. The metal groaned but held. Rage, pure and undiluted, gave him a strength he didn't know he still possessed. It was a strength born not of his alpha status, but of his love for her. With another guttural roar, he slammed his shoulder into the door again. The lock splintered and the door flew open. He scooped Lyra's limp, cold body into his arms, her head lolling against his shoulder. She was terrifyingly light. He fled back into the dark tunnels, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He couldn't fight his way out. Not yet. He needed a place to hide, a place to think. A memory surfaced. The old shaman's quarters, deep in the oldest part of the lodge. His father had sealed it off after the old wolf died, calling his practices a disgrace. It was the one place Marcus, a traditionalist, would never think to look. He found the sealed stone door and managed to pry it open, slipping into a space that had been untouched for decades. The air was thick with the smell of dust, dried herbs, and forgotten magic. He gently laid Lyra down on a dusty cot, her breathing a shallow whisper in the oppressive silence. He had to save her. But how? Desperate, he began to search the room, tearing through rotten chests and crumbling shelves. He was looking for anything, a healing potion, a forgotten prayer, some piece of magic that could bring her back from the brink. His hands closed around a leather-bound scroll, its surface brittle with age. He unrolled it carefully. The text was written in an ancient dialect, but he could make out the words, and what he read stopped his heart. The scroll spoke of a powerful bloodline of healers, wolves who were so in tune with the moon that their touch could mend any wound. They were called the Kade, the moon witches, and their sign, the mark of their lineage, was a faint, silvery birthmark on their shoulder. A moon scar, the very scar he had mocked her for his entire life. It wasn't a mark of a wound. It was the sign of a royal, magical bloodline. He read on, his horror growing with every word. The scroll told of a curse placed upon the Kade generations ago by a jealous rival family who sought to steal their power. The family name was Blackwood, the family of Marcus's ancestors. The curse was designed to suppress their magic, to make them appear weak, fragile, broken. Barely wolf. The words he had used against her were the very words of the curse itself. He hadn't just been a bully. He had been a tool of an ancient evil. The shaman Marcus had used wasn't trying to sever their bond to cleanse him. He was using a forbidden ritual to reactivate the ancient curse, to drain Lyra's life force completely and extinguish her bloodline forever. The truth crashed down on him, devastating and absolute. She wasn't a curse placed upon him. He had been the curse placed upon her. Her bloodline was the key to a power his pack had forgotten, and he had been too blind, too arrogant, too cruel to see it. He looked down at Lyra's still form, her pale face a testament to his own ignorance. She wasn't a weakness that had compromised his pack. She was a stolen queen, and he had spent years helping her captors keep her in chains. A new fire was born in his chest, a fire that burned away his grief and left behind a pure, cold resolve. He would not just save her. He would shatter the curse that had haunted her family for generations. He would restore her to her rightful place. He knelt beside her, gently tracing the mark on her shoulder through her tunic. "I will end this, Lyra," he vowed, his voice a raw, shaking promise in the dusty dark. "I will break this curse, or I will die with you trying." Chapter 20. An Army of Ghosts. Lyra's life was a flickering candle flame, and Kade was terrified that the slightest breeze would snuff it out. He stayed with her in the dusty shaman's room, watching the slow, almost imperceptible rise and fall of her chest. He knew he could not face Marcus alone. His own guards, the warriors he had trained and bled with, now saw him as a traitor. They would not listen to him. But perhaps there were others. Wolves who had been pushed to the fringes, who had been silenced and forgotten under his own rule, and who would be suffering even more under the iron fist of a tyrant like Marcus. He had to try. He gently brushed the hair from Lyra's forehead, a silent promise to return, and slipped back into the shadowed tunnels. He emerged into the night, a ghost in his own territory. He didn't seek out the strong, the proud warriors of the main guard. He sought the forgotten ones. His first stop was the den of the elders, but not the ones on the council. He found the very old wolves, the ones whose teeth were worn and whose bones ached, the ones he and his younger warriors had dismissed as relics. He found them huddled together for warmth, their eyes still sharp, their minds still clear. He did not enter as their alpha. He entered as a desperate male, his heart in his hands. "Marcus has taken my mate," he said, his voice stripped of all command, filled only with a raw, pleading honesty. He used dark magic to do it, the same magic his ancestors used to curse her bloodline. He told them everything he had learned from the scroll. He told them of Lyra's true heritage, and most importantly, he admitted his own failings. "I was a fool," he confessed, his gaze meeting theirs without flinching. "I was arrogant. I valued only one kind of strength. I was wrong. Lyra's strength is in her compassion, in her healing. and I cast her aside. Marcus is ruling by fear. I am asking you to help me rule by love." The old wolves listened, their expressions unreadable. But when he was finished, one of the oldest she-wolves, a contemporary of his own grandmother, nodded slowly. "A pack ruled by fear is a pack already broken," she said, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "We will fight with you." From there, he moved through the territory like a whisper. He found other outcasts, a warrior who had been demoted for questioning Kade's treatment of the Omegas, a young she-wolf whose mate had been killed in the rogue attack that Marcus had orchestrated. He even found the pack's other Omegas huddled in their communal den, living in even greater fear now that their one symbol of hope, the Omega who had captured the Alpha's heart, had been taken. To each of them, he offered the same thing. Not orders, but the truth. He offered them a chance to build a better pack, a pack that valued all its members, not just the strongest fighters. His vulnerability was his new weapon. His honesty was his new armor. Slowly, a small, determined army began to form in the shadows. They were not the pack's elite. They were the ghosts, the forgotten, the marginalized. They were the wolves who had been mocked, dismissed, and ignored. And they were ready to fight for a future they had never been allowed to believe in. He returned to the shaman's room before dawn. He was not alone. Behind him stood a small, silent group of about 20 wolves, the old, the young, the overlooked. They were a ragtag band of rebels, but in their eyes, Kade saw a fierce, burning loyalty he had never earned in all his years as Alpha. He looked at their faces of wolves who had once stood by and watched him mock Lyra, now ready to risk their lives for her. A surge of hope, fierce and bright, washed over him. He had found his true pack. He turned and looked toward the main lodge, where Marcus sat on a stolen throne. The final battle was coming. Chapter 21, A Spirit's Guidance. The air in the hidden chamber was thick with anticipation. Kade's small army of outcasts was ready, their eyes filled with a desperate, determined light. He gave them their final instructions, his voice a low, urgent whisper. The plan was dangerous, a long shot at best. They were vastly outnumbered. As he looked at the faces of the wolves who were trusting him with their lives, a sliver of doubt crept into his heart. Could he really do this? Was he leading them all to their deaths? He turned to Lyra, still so pale and still on the cot. Her breathing was a fragile thread, and he felt a wave of despair wash over him. He was fighting for her, but what if he was already too late? He reached out and took her hand, her skin as cold as ice. He squeezed her fingers, pouring all of his love, all of his fear, all of his hope into that one small touch. "I need you, Lyra," he whispered. "Please." And then she was there. It was not a dream. His eyes were wide open, but the dusty room faded away, replaced by a vision. He saw her standing before him, not the broken body on the cot, but her spirit, her true self. She was made of pure moonlight, a radiant, shimmering figure of soft silver light. The moon scar on her shoulder was not a faint mark, but a glowing, powerful sigil. She did not speak, but her voice filled his mind, a melody of pure love and unwavering strength that washed away all his fear. "I am with you, always." She raised a luminous hand and showed him images, a path unfolding in his mind's eye. She showed him a section of the wall in the great hall, behind the Alpha's throne. It was a place he had looked at 1,000 times and never truly seen. She showed him that it wasn't a wall at all, but a secret door, leading to a hidden passage that went directly to the Alpha's private chambers. Marcus would be there, consolidating his power, feeling safe and untouchable. She was giving him a way in. She was giving him a chance. She was fighting alongside him. He wasn't just fighting for her. He was fighting with her. The vision faded, leaving him back in the dusty room, his heart pounding with a new, divine purpose. His doubt was gone, replaced by an absolute certainty. They would not fail. He turned to his followers, his face transformed. "There's been a change of plans," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that had nothing to do with his old title. He walked to the cot and gently, carefully, gathered Lyra into his arms. He would not leave her behind. She was not a weakness to be hidden away. She was the heart of their rebellion, the sacred cause for which they fought. He settled her against his chest, her head resting near his heart. His small army looked on, their expressions a mixture of awe and reverence. The sight of their former alpha, stripped of his title but filled with a new kind of power, carrying his dying mate into battle. It was the stuff of legends. They moved through the tunnels, a silent, determined procession. As they reached the final passage that would lead them into the heart of the lodge, the sounds of the pack grew louder, the murmur of voices, the clatter of guards. The battle was only moments away. Kade looked down at Lyra's unconscious face, her features peaceful despite everything. His love for her was a physical ache in his chest, a fierce, burning sun that lit his path. He leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear, and whispered a final, desperate vow, a complete and total acceptance of their shared fate. "If I die, Lyra, I'll die marked by you." Chapter 22, A Queen of Moonlight and Fury. The secret door groaned open, spilling Kade and his small army of ghosts directly into the heart of the beast, the Alpha's chambers. Marcus and his handful of elite guards were caught completely by surprise, their shocked faces illuminated by the grand fireplace. For a heartbeat, the room was frozen in a tableau of disbelief. Then, all hell broke loose. Kade's outcasts, filled with the righteous fury of the forgotten, crashed into the guards with a savage cry. The clash of claw and fang, of body against body, filled the chamber. Kade had eyes for only one wolf, Marcus. The usurper stood by the hearth, his face twisting from shock into a mask of pure hatred. "You should have stayed dead, Kade," he snarled. "This ends now." Kade growled back, his voice a low promise of death. He moved, a black blur of vengeful purpose, Lyra's still form held securely against his chest. She was not a liability. She was his reason. Protecting her sharpened his senses, focused his rage into a single deadly point. The fight was brutal. Marcus, empowered by the dark curse he wielded, was unnaturally strong. He met Kade with a force that sent a shockwave through the room. They crashed against furniture, their snarls and roars a terrifying duet. Kade's followers were fighting valiantly, but they were outnumbered. He had to end this. He had to get to Marcus. He dodged a vicious swipe from the usurper, the claws coming just inches from Lyra's face. A protective, primal rage gave Kade a new surge of strength. He lunged, tackling Marcus, and they both went crashing to the floor. They rolled, a tangle of fury and desperation. Kade was on top, his teeth bared, ready for the final killing blow. But Marcus was slippery. He channeled the dark energy of the curse, a wave of sickening black magic that slammed into Kade, throwing him back. He hit the wall hard, the air knocked from his lungs. Lyra tumbled from his grasp, landing on the soft fur rug near the fire. Marcus rose, a triumphant, ugly smile on his face. "You see?" he gloated, stalking toward Kade. "She will always be your weakness." But as he spoke those words, something changed. A soft, silver light began to pulse from Lyra's body. Her eyes, which had been closed in a near-death stillness, snapped open. They were no longer the soft, gentle eyes he knew. They were glowing with the pure, untamed light of the full moon. The curse, which had fed on her weakness, could not contain the raw power of a fully awakened moon witch fighting for her mate. With a silent, psychic scream, the ancient magic inside her shattered its chains. A wave of pure silver energy erupted from her, a cleansing, holy fire. It washed over Kade, and he felt it sink into his bones, mending his wounds, fueling his depleted strength, and supercharging his wolf with a power he had never known. The same wave of energy slammed into Marcus. He screamed, a high, piercing sound of agony. The dark magic that had made him strong was being unraveled, burned away by the very power he had sought to extinguish. His strength fled him, leaving him a cowering, weakened shell. Kade rose to his feet, no longer just an alpha, but a warrior infused with the magic of the moon itself. He looked at Lyra, who was now sitting up, her eyes blazing, her hand outstretched toward him. Their souls, their wolves, their magic, it all merged into one unstoppable force. He turned to Marcus. The fight was already over. He crossed the room in 2 strides and ended the usurper's reign with a single, mercifully swift blow. Silence fell over the room. The remaining guards, seeing their leader fall and feeling the dark influence lift, dropped their weapons and surrendered. It was over. The battle was won. The curse was broken. Kade rushed to Lyra's side as the silver light faded from her eyes. The immense power she had wielded had taken its final toll. Her body, already so weak, could not sustain it. She slumped forward, her strength completely spent. He caught her, pulling her close, his heart a frantic mix of terror and awe. She was alive. She was free. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair. Her voice was a bare whisper, but her words were the clearest thing he had ever heard. Now, you know what strength is. You know what strength. Chapter 23. The Kneeling Pack. The world returned to her in soft focus. Lyra was aware of strong arms around her, of a steady heartbeat against her cheek. The crushing weight that had pressed down on her soul for her entire life was gone. The curse had been a shroud of weakness, a constant murmur in her mind that told her she was nothing. Now there was only a quiet, calm strength, a feeling of being completely and utterly herself for the first time. She felt Kade's arms tighten around her, and she managed to lift her head, her gaze meeting his. The relief, the love, the pure, unadulterated adoration in his eyes was a balm to her spirit. He stood, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. He walked out of the ruined chambers and into the great hall. His small army of outcasts had secured the lodge, and now the rest of the pack was gathering, drawn by the silence that had followed the sounds of battle. They were a sea of confused, frightened faces. They saw Kade, covered in blood but standing tall. They saw the defeated Marcus being dragged away in chains. And then they saw her. All eyes turned to Lyra, cradled in Kade's arms. She was no longer the invisible Omega, the pack's ghost. Though her body was weak and wounded, a new power radiated from her. A quiet, luminous energy that everyone could feel. The moon scar on her shoulder, once a symbol of shame, was now glowing with a soft, residual silver light, a visible mark of her true heritage. The pack could feel the shift in the air, the clean, pure magic that had replaced the dark, oppressive cloud of Marcus's rule. They looked at her, and they did not see a witch. They saw a savior. Kade didn't walk to the Alpha's throne. He bypassed it completely. He walked to the very center of the hall, to the spot where he had once humiliated her in front of everyone. There, he stopped. The entire pack held its breath. They expected him to reclaim his title, to declare his victory. He did something else entirely. Slowly, with a reverence that stunned the onlookers into silence, he lowered himself to one knee. He did not put her down. He knelt before the pack, still holding her, an Alpha bowing to his queen. He bowed his head, an act of ultimate devotion, of complete and total surrender, not to the pack, but to her. "I was nothing until you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, his words meant for her ears only. The meaning of his action was unmistakable. He was not their king. She was their salvation. One by one, starting with the old she-wolf who had first joined his cause, the pack began to kneel. The proud warriors, the gossiping she-wolves, the Omegas, the elders, they all bent a knee. They were not kneeling to their Alpha. They were kneeling to the Moon Witch who had broken a generational curse. They were kneeling to the Omega who had saved them all. They were kneeling to their true Luna. Lyra looked out at the sea of bowed heads, tears welling in her eyes. She had spent her life trying to be invisible, and now she was finally seen. Chapter 24. The Healer's Circle. Months later, the last of the autumn leaves had fallen, and the first snows of winter dusted the peaks of the mountains. The Crimson Ridge Pack was healing. The change was not just in their leadership. It was in the very soul of the pack. The dark cloud of Marcus's betrayal and the older, more insidious poison of the Blackwood curse had been lifted, leaving behind a space for something new to grow. And Lyra was the one tending the garden. She did not take her place on a throne beside Kade. Her throne was a simple woven blanket on the soft grass of the main clearing. She was not a Luna who ruled with commands and authority. She was a Luna who ruled with compassion and grace. She had found her true calling, the purpose her bloodline had always intended for her. She had established a healer's circle. Every week, any wolf who was hurting, in body or in spirit, was welcome. She would sit with them, listen to their stories, and use the gentle silver magic of the moon that now flowed so freely through her to soothe their pains. She healed the physical wounds from the battle, but more importantly, she healed the invisible scars left by years of a culture that valued only brute strength. She taught them that there was power in gentleness, strength in vulnerability. From the steps of the Great Hall, Kade watched her. He was their alpha, but he was a different kind of leader now. He no longer led with roars and dominance, but with a quiet, steady confidence that came from knowing his own worth was not tied to his title. He listened to the counsel of the elders. He valued the contributions of the Omegas. He had learned from her that a pack was not a pyramid with an alpha at the top. It was a circle, with every member connected, every member essential. His strength was no longer a shield to hide his fear. It was a shield to protect his family. All of them. He saw her laugh, a bright, clear sound that carried on the crisp winter air. It was a sound he had never heard from her in all the years he had known her before their flight. It was the sound of a soul set free. He walked down the steps and crossed the clearing, his presence no longer causing the other wolves to flinch or cower. He approached the circle not as an alpha inspecting his subjects, but as a mate coming home. He sat down on the blanket beside her, taking her hand in his, their fingers lacing together naturally. She smiled at him, her eyes shining with a love so deep it still sometimes stole his breath. He was no longer her jailer or her savior. He was her partner, her equal. He looked at the pack, at the healing circle, at the new world they were building together, a world of balance and respect. He looked at Lyra, his mate, his Luna, his heart. He had once thought that loving her would be his ruin, a weakness that would destroy him. He had been so wrong. Love had not been a cage. It had been the key. Lyra leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the peaceful, easy rhythm of his breathing. She looked at the circle of wolves before her, at the man beside her, at the bright, hopeful future that stretched out in front of them. She had started this journey as a broken, invisible girl wishing only for escape. She had been a prisoner of her pack, of a curse, of a man's cruelty. But now, she was none of those things. She was a healer, a leader, a Luna, and a woman who was deeply, completely loved. The realization settled over her, as warm and bright as the moon on a clear night. Love hadn't made her weak. It had made her free.